everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we have another true crime. Jesus Christ. Rewind. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am your host Lacey Bean, and today I have another solved true crime video for you that is wild. So today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of a girl named Elisa Claps. This happened in Italy, and you may have heard of this case before, but you may have heard it from a different perspective, and it be called the haircut killer. Now, I am focusing on Elisa's disappearance, and we will get into the details of this crazy story more, but I am approaching it in a different perspective. So if you have heard of this case before, I definitely suggest that you stick around because you're going to learn things that you probably didn't know before. So who was Elisa Claps? Elisa Claps was a 16-year-old girl that lived in Italy. She was known to be very kind and generous and just a loving person. She was very popular in school. She was very active in her church. She even sang in the choir. And she even wanted to become a doctor one day and be a doctor in Africa to help people. She had a huge heart to help people and even animals. This story has gone around told by her family that she actually at one point spent a few hours helping a butterfly who had hurt its wings to get it back to health and fly off, and she actually did save that butterfly that day. So you can tell that just Elisa is a very sweet and kind little girl, and the downfall to her is her parents and family and even friends have said that Elisa could be a little naive sometimes. She always kind of gave people the benefit of the doubt, and even if people were not the best of characters, she wanted to be nice and kind to them. And that hurts her in the future, and we will get into that. Now, with this case being in Italy, there are a ton of Italian names, and I will do my best to pronounce them, but I am going to tell you right now, I am not going to do amazing at it. So give me some grace. So on the morning of Sunday, September 12th of 1993, Elisa's family had decided they wanted to go to their countryside home that they, I think, had just recently bought and have lunch as a family. So Filomena, which is Elisa's mom, and Antonio, which is Elisa's dad, had gotten up and went out there early with their middle son, Luciano. Now, they had went out there to prepare lunch and get it ready for Elisa and Elisa's friend and their older son, Gildo. I know there's a lot of names I'm throwing at you, okay? So try to stick with me. They were going to prepare the lunch and wait for them to arrive later on. Now, the night before, Elisa had actually stayed the night with her older brother, Gildo. Now, Gildo had gotten Elisa up, and she had actually made plans to meet her friend, Eliana. These names, Elisa and Eliana, I'm going to mix them up. I'm going to try my best, but they're too much alike. Okay, so Elisa got up, and she had plans to meet with her friend, Eliana. They were going to go to Mass at church at 11 o'clock, and then after Mass, return home. And then all three of them were going to go to the countryside to meet Elisa and Gildo's family for lunch, okay? That was the plan for the day. Well, Elisa got up, she got dressed. Eliana came and picked her up about a little bit before 11 or so, and they head off to church. Now, they were supposed to return home within about 40 minutes to get ready to go to the countryside to have lunch. Well, after an hour, Elisa and Eliana had not returned, and it started to make Gildo very worried. And shortly after this, Eliana showed up to Gildo's house without Elisa. Gildo's asking Eliana, where is Elisa? And Eliana said, we got separated at the church. I assumed that she would have already come back here and was here waiting for me. Gildo got very upset and was like, no, she's not here. So Eliana was like, I'll go look for her. So Eliana leaves. She goes to look for her. Another 30 minutes pass, and Gildo is even more worried. So he leaves to go and look for his sister as well. He ends up finding Eliana and says, hey, go back to my house and stick by the phone just in case she calls. I will look around here. Gildo looked around the church, he looked around the town square area, and could not find Elisa. And now around this time, it becomes 2 p.m. and it had been hours since Gildo and Elisa and Eliana were supposed to arrive at the countryside home. Now, I think this was a home that they had just recently bought, so they didn't have phone access out there. Filomena, Luciano, and Antonio all started to get worried about their children and their brother and sister, and so they decided, let's just pack up and we're going to go back to Gildo's house and see if we can, figure out what happened. Now, they weren't saying that they were super worried at this point, But deep down, all of them were like, something bad must have happened for them to just not have showed up. And this was really out of character for both of them. They were punctual people. They never made plans and then just never showed up. They were kind and generous and let people know where they were going to be, or if they had to cancel plans, they always let them know. You know, this was just very out of character all the way around. When they returned home, they ended up finding out that Elisa had been missing, and Gildo and Eliana were making phone calls to all their friends to see if anybody had seen her that day. And instantly, Filomena and Antonio were filled with distraught emotions, worried about where their daughter could be. Now, what didn't make sense for Gildo was them getting separated at the church. He was like, this is just weird. You guys were together. How did you get separated? It's not like it was like a concert where there's a ton of people and you got separated. So he knew there was more to the story than Eliana was telling him. So he pressed her for more information. And that is when Eliana let them know that they were not totally honest with their plans for that day. What they had planned to do was to go to Mass at 11 o'clock and meet a man named Danilo Restivo. Danilo wanted to meet with Elisa and give her a gift for passing some recent exams that she had taken. So Elisa, to be nice, decided that she would meet with Danilo Restivo and receive this gift. Well, when they got to the church, Danilo and Elisa met, and Eliana left them alone to, have their meeting or whatever. And then after about 15 to 30 minutes, she realized that she couldn't find Elisa and thought that Elisa had just left after meeting with Danilo and had gone back home. So when the family finds out that Danilo is involved in this and Danilo was the last person to see Elisa, the family got instantly worried. Danilo Restivo did not have the best reputation in Italy at this time. He was very known by literally everybody because he had a very prominent family. They had money. They were known by all of the bigwigs in companies and politicians and things like that. They had a very high stature when it comes to their place in society. But Danilo was just awkward. Girls would say that he was very creepy. He would stare at them. He would make weird comments. And he just, when you get around somebody, you can kind of tell, like, ooh, they weird me out. That was Danilo Restivo. Now, Elisa was reluctant to go and meet with Danilo because she knew that Danilo liked her, but she did not like him back. And there had been some things that had happened that made Elisa just feel very uncomfortable. It seemed like everywhere she went, sometimes Danilo would just appear there. There was even a time where her and her brothers had went out to go shopping or something at a nearby town that was a good ways away, like 20, 30 minutes away. And all of a sudden Danilo was there and it scared her. She was standing by her brother and she grabbed one of her brother's arms to kind of let them know, like, oh God, he's here. And they asked her, do you want me to get him to go away? And she was like, no, it's okay. She was, just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he definitely creeped her out. But she's just that nice person that she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Even though Elisa was reluctant to meet with him, Danilo was very persistent and wanted to give her this gift so bad. And so to be nice and to not hurt his feelings, Elisa agreed to meet with him. But she knew that her brothers didn't approve of Danilo, that they didn't like him, that he was a little weird to them as well. So that's why she didn't say anything about the meeting. Danilo was also teased because he had a very feminine voice and he was just very awkward. He had no people skills, no social skills. He would just talk about random and weird things. He would even brag that he could get any women to sleep with him just by offering some special cigarettes. He was trying to find his place. He was trying to make people like him, but everybody knew that he was just a wee bit awkward and creepy. Now, since Gildo found out that Danilo Restivo was the last person to see Elisa, he called Danilo Restivo's family home. He asked him what had happened. Danilo's story was that they had met at the church. They had talked for about 15 minutes and Elisa seemed a little agitated because there was some man in the town square that had harassed her that day and it just had really bugged her. They'd only talked for 15 minutes and then Elisa left and Danny said he stayed for another 15 or so minutes to pray and that he never saw Elisa after that. And that was his story. Gildo kept trying to ask questions, but then all of a sudden, Danny Lowe's father picked up the phone and said he knows nothing and hangs up on Gildo. Now, of course, Gildo's like, what the heck? This is crazy. Like, why did he just hang up on me? And it instantly gave him this like, you're not telling the whole story. Now, after this, hours had passed and they still had no sign of Elisa, and they were just growing more and more worried. At this point, Luciano was very upset. He actually had been friends with Danny Lowe for a while, like at least like acquaintance type friends. And so he was upset and said, you know what, I'm just going to go there in person. So he went to Danny Lowe Restivo's family home to question him. He said when he arrived, Danny Lowe Restivo answered the door and was visibly nervous and shaking and just didn't seem like he could get his story straight. And Luciano also saw a huge cut on the back of Danny Lowe's hand. He asked Danny Lowe what had happened, and Danny Lowe's response was that he was walking home through a construction site, fell, and cut his hand on some metal, and that he even had to go to the hospital to get a stitch. And that was that. There was no more information that he could get from Danny Lowe, so Luciano left. Now, from what I've gathered, I can't tell if Luciano and Gildo returned to the home a few more times that night, because I did hear that the next time that they had come to the home of Danny Lowe Restivo, that Danny Lowe had completely changed his demeanor. He went from being sweaty and nervous to very calm and collected and poignant on his story and what had happened. There is some rumors that his dad had taken him into his office between those two visits and had had a talk with him, and his talk with Danny Lowe made him calm down. Now, that is not confirmed, but you will tend to believe that the more we get into this story, that is what had happened. They returned another time a few hours later to question Danny Lowe again, and Danny Lowe's parents told them that Danny Lowe was not home. He had actually left town because he had to take an entrance exam to, I think it was like dental school or something like that, the next day, and so he wasn't there. Now, of course, the family is still worried. They contact the police and they try to get the police involved. But from the very beginning, police were reluctant because of Elisa's age. Elisa was 16, and so instantly the police were like, oh, she ran away from home. And even though Elisa's family kept telling them, no, she didn't run away. That is not like her. We have no aught or conflict in our family right now. Nothing has happened to make her want to run away. Like, that is not what had happened. They didn't want to take it very seriously, especially that very first day. They even told the police that Danny Lowe Restivo was the last person to see Elisa, and they urged the police to go and question him. But the police were like, no, she's just a runaway, or she's probably out with her friends, like she'll be home soon. It was also during that time that it was very much normal practice for a missing persons case to wait like the 24 to 48 hour kind of thing before police actually started investigating it, which is not common practice now. Like if you have a missing persons and you go to the police and they're like, oh, we can't do anything for 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever it is, like you can fight them on that, because actually the first 24 to 48 hours of a missing person is like the most critical time of finding them and bringing them home. So always fight against that. Side note. Anyways, moving on. Now, since Elisa had met Danny Lowe at the church, Gildo decided that if police weren't going to do anything, he was going to search himself and even his friends. He got a bunch of his friends and Elisa's friends together to try to search all around town for Elisa. Gildo went back to the church and it was locked when he arrived. So he ended up finding somebody that was able to unlock the church, and he looked through all of the pews, under the pews, in all the rooms that he could until he got near the back of the altar. And there was a door that allowed access to the upper levels of the church and the upper rooms, and that door was locked. And that was the only access point to those upper levels. And so he asked the person who had unlocked the church for him to let him in this area. And they said the only person that has a key to that is Pastor Don Mimi. And he had left that day for like a 4 or 5 day spa retreat. And he was the only one that had the key. So they couldn't search there. So Gildo left and just continued searching for Elisa around town. They searched all throughout the night. And through that night, Antonio and Filomena stayed by the phone, just waiting and hoping and praying that every time the phone rang that it would be Elisa, or at least somebody who had like kidnapped her and they were wanting some kind of ransom. But every time the phone rang, it was either one of Elisa's friends trying to see what had happened, or it was a reporter trying to ask questions about the case. And They even had, so creepy, but they even had a few phone calls that night where it was completely silent on the other end. Nobody would answer, but that they could hear this kind of like muffled breathing on the other side. Like, I don't know about you, but that would be so fucking creepy to hear, especially like the day my child goes missing. It's like, oh Lord, no, 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 no. So the next day, on Monday, September 13th, the police finally took the case seriously and started looking into the disappearance of Elisa. The family and the friends were still searching all around town, and they even made posters and posted them everywhere. But this kind of backfired in a really weird way. The police started questioning the family and saying that since they were so fast to make these missing person signs and posting them everywhere, that it was as if they were trying to get the attention off of them, and it actually made them look more guilty in the police's eyes. Like, I don't, the police work on this case, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, because Elisa had so many friends and family searching for her, it started to get even more and more media attention. And it didn't take long for literally everybody around this area and even across Italy to know the missing case of Elisa Claps. They started to get tips on sightings of Elisa, and they even had people claiming that they had Elisa with them. But they dismissed these claims because the timeline that they got from friends and family of that day just did not line up with Elisa's disappearance. And so these were easily dismissed in the very beginning. So since the police started taking the case more serious, they decided that yes, they were going to interview Danilo Restivo. But remember, he's out of town taking his exams, like entrance exams for the dental school. So word gets around that the police want to ask him some questions. And so Danilo's father and Danilo's father's lawyer went all the way to where Danilo was taking this test and picked him up from the bus station and had him get off the bus and into the car with them, and they drove Danilo back home. Allegedly, in this car, the lawyer asked Danilo to tell him what happened that day, and basically it was them trying to get their story straight before they arrived at the police station. They arrived at the police station, and Danilo started telling exactly what had went on that day between him and Elisa to the police. Now, Danilo said that when he met with Elisa, that Elisa was very agitated and upset with her family, and that she had told him that she had planned on running away to Naples, and Danilo said that he tried to calm her down and to help her, but that she was determined that she was going to run away. And in this meeting with the police, he actually doesn't mention at all that he had a present for Elisa. He doesn't even mention it. He said that the reason that he wanted to meet with Elisa is because he actually liked one of her friends, and he wanted to get her opinion on whether he should pursue it or not, because he was trying to pursue it, but the girl wasn't interested, and so he wanted to get Elisa's opinion on what he should do with this relationship, is what he told police. But yet everybody says that he wanted to give her a present, and he mentions none of that to police. He maintains his story that they only talked for about 15 minutes. She left. He continued to pray at the church for another 15 minutes, and then he went home. They saw the cut on the back of his hand and asked what had happened. He had said that he was walking home through this construction site, and he fell and he cut his hand on some metal. Now, it was these escalators that they were building that he fell down and cut his hand. And the police noticed in this interrogation, questioning, that Danilo was very precise with his answers. He was just boom, boom, boom with everything, as if it had been rehearsed. And this started to make the police very suspect of Danilo. And so they decided, hey, take us back to the construction site where they're building these escalators and show us exactly what happened. So Danny did just that. He took them there, and he starts to tell them the story of how he fell head over heels down these stairs and escalator. Nothing else was wrong with him. He had no bumps, no bruises, no cuts, no scrapes, except for the one on the back of his hand. They were like, this doesn't even make sense. You would have more damage, at least bruises, at least a cut or more, falling down this entire flight of stairs on this escalator. But Danny Lowe stuck with his story. So they decided, okay, if you're telling the truth and you cut your hand, then you're going to have blood on your clothes from that day. So can you please hand over your clothes? Now, Danny Lowe's father was with him at this time, and I even think his mom was there. And they said yes, that they would give over the clothes. So the police were getting in their car. Danny Lowe and his father and mother, and I'm pretty sure lawyer at the time, were also getting in their car. And one of the police overheard the mother say that, but those clothes are already washed and they're hanging out on the line. They get in the car and they make it to the Restivo house, and the Restivos hand over some clothes to the investigators. The investigators at this point see the clothes hanging out on the line, and they said, we would also like those clothes out on the line. And that is when the Restivo family, especially the father, said, no, you need to have a search warrant for those clothes. So this definitely started making the police feel super weird, because like, okay, all of a sudden you went from cooperating to not cooperating, and now you need a search warrant. So they called over to the police station trying to get a search warrant for these clothes, and some of the police stayed behind at the Restivo house to wait for the search warrant, just so the family couldn't like destroy the clothes. And they waited and waited until they finally got a phone call that the search warrant wasn't permitted and that they didn't need the clothes, so to just come back to the police station. The police that were there at the time were very weirded out by this. Like, we have evidence that we need to collect, and the search warrant is being blocked, and they couldn't understand why this search warrant was being blocked and why investigators weren't allowed to collect these clothes, but they weren't. And so they had to go back empty-handed. Now, the belief is, because Danny Lowe's father and family was so prominent in this community, he had a lot of ties to politicians and just people of, the upper class society in this area within Italy. And so it is believed that at this time, Danny Lowe's father ended up paying off some politicians and police in order to get the warrant blocked. If I'm understanding this correctly, none of that has been proved. That is allegedly what had happened. Even to this day, that cannot be confirmed. I think the closest that we were able to confirm any of that was that there was some large sums of money taken out of the Restivo's bank account that could not be accounted for, where it went, what it was for, and things like that. So you can kind of put two and two together and assume that yes, he did pay off some people to try to protect his son. Now, the Claps family, Elisa's parents, Antonio and Filomena, they still wanted to find Elisa, and of course they held to hope and looked for her for years to come. Antonio actually, after a few years, became very bitter over the whole thing, and he actually, the night of the disappearance, wanted to go and take care of Danny Lowe himself, but his family held him back. And I think he held on to some bitterness that he wasn't able to protect his daughter and to take care of it in that moment, because the family knew that Danny Lowe was a very unsavory character. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but it has been known to a lot of people in town that Danny Lowe could be dangerous, because when he was a little bit younger, he actually had been playing, I think what they were playing was like Cowboys and Indians of the Day, is what they had called it. And Danny Lowe convinced these two other young boys, I think they were 12 at the time, 11 or 12, and he tied them up and he ended up putting them in like a barn or a shed. And the boys thought that they were playing, but all of a sudden it became more and more dangerous. Danny Lowe ended up producing a knife to the boys, and he ended up cutting one of the boys' necks. It was actually a butter knife, and so it still cut him, but not enough to, kill the boy. So after Danny Lowe left the kids in this shed or barn or something like that, he left just for them to die, but the boys were able to get free and escape and get home and tell, their parents and authorities what had happened. Now, charges were filed against Danny Lowe, but they ended up settling out of court for an undisclosed amount, and it was never taken to trial, and Danny Lowe never held any kind of responsibility, like consequences for what he had done that day. So it was pretty well known that this had happened. So everybody, especially the Claps family, were very, very suspicious of Danny Lowe this entire time and suspected that his father was covering for him. Now, as years went on, the Claps family continued to look for Elisa, and just, I mean, the amount of false leads they got in this case is just heartbreaking. They had so many people claiming that they had Elisa and that they wanted some kind of sum of money. And because they were so desperate to find their daughter, they went along with each and every one, even though they knew from the beginning that most likely they did not have Elisa. They couldn't not follow each and every lead. And it was just one lead after another of disappointment and a false lead. And it was, people took advantage of this family right and left. And throughout the years, they continued to get these weird phone calls where it was just silent and all they could hear was this eerie breathing on the other end. Like, how fucking creepy is that? Like, you've never gotten these phone calls before, and then all of a sudden you start getting them the day your daughter goes missing, and then you continue to get them after that. Like, I don't know what that would feel like, sitting there on the phone knowing that most likely on the other end is the person who took my daughter, kidnapped her, harmed her, killed her, something. Like, they know something and they're just silent and breathing into the phone. Like, oh, creepy. Now, I'm sure at this point you're thinking, what about the church? You know, like, what? Go to the church. What about the church? Now, this is where this case starts going into conspiracy mode, because it just gets wild at this point. So the family tries multiple times to go to the church and search it, but Pastor Don Mimi refused to let not only them, but the police come and search it, which, knowing that that was the last place that Elisa was, like, easily they could have gotten a search warrant to go in and search the entire premise, but they didn't. And it is still very well unknown on why the police were unable or didn't even try to get a search warrant. And of course, that's where we go back to Danny Lowe's father paying people off. Not only would Pastor Don Mimi not let them search the church, but after a handful of months, the mother of Elisa, Philomena, she would make these boxes. She would put them in all the local churches, and she would leave them there so that people could give like anonymous tips if they had saw something that day, if they heard something or anything like that. And all of the churches allowed them to put these boxes in there. But when Philomena had put a box in the church that Pastor Don Mimi was at, and the one that Elisa had went missing from, he threw it away. After a few years of Elisa being missing, on the anniversary of her missing date, all the churches got together and rang their bells at a specific time, except the church that Pastor Don Mimi was at. He refused to participate. Don Mimi even tried to say that he did not know Danny Lowe Restivo, but then it was shown to be that he did know them. He actually knew the family very well. He is pictured in a picture with Danny Lowe at Danny Lowe's 18th birthday. He's right there standing with the family and with Danny Lowe, and also trying to claim that he doesn't even know who Danny Lowe Restivo is. So all of this behavior is very sus, to say the least. Now, Elisa's family did not ever stop looking for Elisa, and they looked and looked, and they pushed authorities to do more and more in the case with absolutely no luck. There was even a private detective that worked with Elisa's family pro bono for years, searching out different leads, going to different countries where there was sightings of Elisa, and trying to help push authorities to do more in the case. And they just, they did everything they could to find Elisa and to get justice and find the truth of what had happened. After many years of going through this, they felt as if they would never know what happened to Elisa. But that is until the murder of a woman named Heather Barnett. On November 12th of 2002 in Bournemouth, it's a place in England, a son whose name was Terry, he was 14 at the time, and his little sister Caitlin, who was 11, came home and found that their house was eerily quiet. They went in, and usually their mom was there because she was a seamstress. She would, make stuff, curtains and things like that for people, and she worked from home. And so she was always home when the kids got home. She was usually in her sewing room. You could hear the sewing machine going, or they saw her immediately when they walked in. And this day, she wasn't there. And that was very strange for the kids. Not only was she not there, but it was quiet. So they were like, is she in another room? But it's really quiet. Like, they couldn't find her. And Terry went off to his room, and Caitlin just had gotten a weird feeling. And so she started searching through the house. When she got to her mom's sewing room, she found that it was a complete wreck. And this gave her a weird feeling. So she started looking at all the other house, rooms in the house, and couldn't find her mom. And then she saw that the bathroom door was closed. So she went to go check in the bathroom, but got a little nervous. And I think at this point she ended up calling for Terry and said that mom wasn't anywhere. So they actually went and checked the bathroom together. And when they opened it up, they saw a horrifying scene. Their mother was brutally murdered, laying dead on the bathroom floor, and there was blood everywhere. Caitlin instantly just started screaming, and Terry started freaking out, but also trying to stay calm and collected because he was the older one and he knew he needed to call police. So he got the phone, he called police to tell them what had happened and what they had found, and that he needed, assistance and help. Instantly, the dispatcher sent out police and ambulance to the scene. But in the meantime, Terry and Caitlin decided that they were going to go outside and wait for police there because they just didn't want to be in the house. I can't blame them. After seeing what they saw, I would be freaking out and running from that house too. When they went outside, their neighbors had arrived home and saw the kids frantic. And so they went over to console the kids and find out what had happened. And when they found out what had happened, they were distraught for these kids. And so they decided to bring the kids into their home so they could wait for police there. The police arrived, went into the kids' home and into the bathroom, and found, a gruesome scene. There in the bathroom on the floor laid Heather Barnett, brutally murdered. Blood was everywhere. Her pants had been pulled down just to reveal her lower private areas. Her shirt had been lifted up, and her bra had been cut right between the cups. Her breasts had actually been severed from her body, and they had been laid on the ground next to her head. And in both of her hands were fresh clumps of cut hair. It was awful. The scene was gruesome, and police were disgusted and horrified at what they had seen. And not only that, that's what the children had walked into and found their mother. Instantly, an investigation took place, and they tried to piece together and find as many clues to try to solve this murder. Now, they had found in their investigation that Heather had left the house that morning to take her kids to school, and from surveillance footage, they had found that Heather arrived home at 9 a.m. But they also found in some phone calls that by 10:15, a couple phone calls had started coming into her home that went unanswered. So that gave them a very narrow window of time frame that Heather had been murdered. So between 9 a.m. and 10:15 was when Heather Barnett was brutally murdered in her home. When they were investigating the scene, they also found bloody shoe footprints around the house that had walked from the bathroom to another room, but then all of a sudden stopped. This made the police assume that whoever had done these murders had come prepared, and that they had actually changed their shoes in that moment so that they could leave the premise without leaving a trail of blood behind them, and thought that they must have actually changed their clothes because the scene was bloody, very bloody. So there's no way that somebody in broad daylight could have committed this murder and only changed their shoes and left without anybody seeing them literally covered in blood. They had found that there was no forced entry. So this meant from the very beginning that police thought, okay, it has to be somebody that Heather Barnett knows. And they also found out that the attack had happened in the sewing room. She had actually died from a very severe blow to the head, which had fractured her skull, and she died almost instantly. So they're assuming that the attack happened in the sewing room first. She got this blow to their head, and she immediately died. The killer then drug her body from the sewing room to the bathroom, and that is where he brutally mutilated her and left that gruesome scene. Now, that evening that the police arrived and found Heather Barnett's body, they also decided to take in the neighbors that had took the kids in to console them. They took in those neighbors to just question them. And the neighbor was none other than Danny Lowe Restivo and his new wife. When they started questioning the neighbors, Danny Lowe ended up, just offering up like, oh, I have this bus ticket. I was on the bus at this time. Even though he had no idea when this murder had taken place or anything, he gave them a bus ticket for the exact time that would have given him an alibi in that exact time window. And police thought this was a little strange to just like, here's my alibi, even though they didn't ask for it. And he was only there to be asked questions because they were the ones to console the kids. If they see something, you live next door, like I think it was across the street, like you live across the street. This was strange. Now his alibi was this bus ticket for 8:44 a.m. saying that he had gotten on the bus at 8:44 and he was heading to this local college where he was going to be taking this computer class. This was a pretty lengthy investigation. And as time went on, Danny Lowe was just looking more and more and more suspicious. They ended up quickly finding out that he was connected to the disappearance of Elisa Claps. And so that instantly put him at the top of suspect list for them. And they started putting him under surveillance and watching him so that they could try to find some more concrete evidence against Danny Lowe Restivo. As they were investigating this case, they had found in Heather Barnett's emails some really incriminating evidence against Danny Lowe Restivo. They had found that 1 week before the murder happened, Heather Barnett's spare key to the house had went missing. And she had actually suspected that Danny Lowe Restivo himself had accidentally taken the key. And the reason for this is Danny Lowe had actually hired Heather Barnett to make some custom curtains as a surprise for his wife. So he had come over to her house to kind of talk about what he wanted. And when he left, all of a sudden the spare key was gone. So she assumed that he had picked it up by accident. At least that's what she was saying to her, sister. And she'd even emailed Danny Lowe's wife and said, I think he picked these up by accident. Like he was over because he's trying to do a surprise for you. Please don't ask any questions. But if you find the key, can you please get it back to me? But it still creeped her out that somehow there's a key to her house that's missing. And so she instantly had the locks changed so that she was protected, her and her family. Not only that, but Danny Lowe was actually hiring her for this custom curtain job. But in an email to her sister, she said that he was just a really weird customer and he had no idea what he wanted. And so she was having a really hard time finishing these curtains because he was always just wish-washy. It was very awkward when he was over. He didn't know what he wanted. And she was kind of confused on why he even wanted these curtains, especially if he didn't know what he wanted. Because usually if you're getting a custom curtain made, those are really expensive. So wouldn't you know exactly what you wanted? Because if you don't know what you want, wouldn't you just go buy something from the store that's already made if it's not something that's supposed to be super special and you already have this meaning? It was just weird. So Danny, quickly he has become the prime suspect, but they don't have any concrete evidence that it was him who committed this murder. And so they spend a long time surveilling him and just trying to get some kind of concrete evidence because they want to be able to arrest him and charge him with this murder, but also they want to have a slam dunk case because if they try to charge him with this murder and he's found not guilty on the basis that they didn't have enough evidence, he can't be retried. And so they definitely take their time investigating him. They put him under surveillance and they just see some really odd behavior. They find that Danny Lowe Restivo is cutting women's hair when he is on the bus. He would literally sit behind women and just cut chunks of their hair off. And it was very well known in this area that there was somebody that was cutting people's hair, and they quickly found out that it was Danny Lowe Restivo. Not only that, but back in Italy, they had also there was many people in this area that knew that Danny Lowe had this weird hair thing, and he would cut women's hair in just the most odd of places, on buses, at movie theaters, sit behind him and just freaking cut chunks of their hair off. Some more suspicious behavior is they ended up surveilling Danny Lowe Restivo and found that he would go to this park area and he would kind of walk around as if he was trying to spy on women. And then when women would walk by him, he would kind of hunch down behind the bushes, and he was just acting So weird. The cops that were surveilling him got so weirded out by this that they called into headquarters, and headquarters was like, we don't want you to blow this and let him know that people are surveilling him. So like, we'll just send in patrol officers to question him about like, I think a robbery in the area. So they sent some in, they asked him some questions, and they ended up asking him if they could, search his vehicle just since he was already there. And Danny Restivo was like, okay, sure, you can search my vehicle, which I'm not sure why he allowed them to, because what they found was weird. They open his trunk and they find a bag with like extra clothes, a knife, some scissors, a balaclava, which is one of those like masks that like all you can see is like your eyes and your nose, I think. I think your mouth's even covered, but one of those, and some gloves. And so instantly they were like, well, this is suspicious. What are you doing with this stuff? They ended up, I think at this point, taking him in for questioning, and the police were asking him like, we even saw you kind of creeping around. Like, what were you doing in this park? Like, what was your reason for even being at this park at this time of day? He said that the reason that he would like crouch down behind these bushes is because he had some lizards at home. And so he was collecting insects to feed to his lizards. And so it was a strange excuse, but at the same time, the police were like, fuck, that kind of makes sense. Like, I can't kind of argue with that one. So they just kept surveilling Danny Restivo for a long time. And a handful of years after the murder in 2006, they ended up raiding Danny Restivo's house. And that is when they found a pair of shoes that matched the bloody footprints at the murder scene of Heather Barnett. But they couldn't find any DNA on them because the shoes had been soaked in bleach. Even Danny Restivo's wife was like, why the heck did you bleach and soak these shoes in bleach? And Danny Restivo tried to say that he thought it was just soap. And she was like, you would have smelt that it was bleach. Like, are you an idiot? Like, everybody just treated him as if he was a child and like didn't know what he was doing. But I think that was Danny Lowe's way of like trying to like act the fool when really like he was pretty smart at getting away with shit, because he had been for a really long time. Now remember, this murder happened in 2002. So in 2008, they ended up testing this green towel that they had found in Heather Barnett's home. And the reason that they had waited so long to test it is they had tested a few times. If I'm understanding correctly, they tested a few times and nothing had come back. But as DNA, technology had gotten stronger and stronger, they ended up testing it again in 2008 and found the smoking gun. Well, at least the smoking gun that they thought it was going to be. They found Danny Restivo's DNA on this green towel. But fucking Danny Restivo comes back with, oh, yeah, that is my towel. I gave it to Heather Barnett to show her the color of green that I wanted the curtains to match. So the cops were like, fuck, we can't, like, you just poked a major hole in, like, our biggest piece of evidence. So again, they were like, damn it, we can't charge you with this because you're going to be able to poke a hole in every freaking piece of evidence we have. And they needed something concrete. They needed it. So they had to wait. There was a point where police thought that this case would become one of those just unsolved cases. It was going to be one of those cases that you knew who the murderer was, but you just didn't have enough evidence to like nail them for it. And so it would just be unsolved. That is until March of 2010. The police in Bournemouth ended up getting a phone call from Italy saying that they'd found a body. The body of Elisa Claps. Back in Italy, there was some construction workers that were trying to fix a leak at the church that Danny Restivo and Elisa Claps had last been seen at. And they couldn't get this leak fixed, so they ended up having to go to this like weird attic area in the church. And when the construction worker had went into this attic area, he shone his light and ended up finding a mummified body of a young girl. Instantly, this news spread like wildfire in Italy. I mean, this girl had been missing for this 2010, so 17 years at this point. And so everybody knew, without a shadow of doubt, that had to be Elisa Claps' body. In the church, the last place she was seen, she had been there the entire time. There was multiple like crime scene investigators that came and ended up having to like break open a part of the wall of this church to get her out and take her for an autopsy to figure out what happened to her. They did identify her body by some of the belongings that were with her. They were identified by her family, and it was found to be Elisa Claps. Now, the Bournemouth police were excited in the sense of, okay, he was connected to that missing person and he is connected to this murder. What if there's some commonalities, and that can be our hard evidence that puts this man away? So they rush over to Italy to see if they can help with the investigation and if they can get anything, any kind of evidence that would connect Danny Lowe to both cases. Now, when Elisa's body was being taken out of the church, their family was notified very quickly that a body had been found, and their family rushed over to the church as they watched investigators and crime scene techs take her body out of the church. And at the same time, the original investigator of the missing case of Elisa Claps had shown up. And Gildo, her older brother, oh man, he was pissed, which I can't blame him. Come on, like, she was found in the last place that she was, and it had been blocked from being searched for years. Like, I'd be fucking pissed too. Gildo ended up snapping at this investigator and said, if you would have done what you were supposed to do and actually done your job years ago, we wouldn't be standing here today. And that investigator had the audacity to turn back and say, my conscience is clear. Bitch. No, it ain't. You do not sleep well at night. Now, when they did the autopsy of Elisa Claps, they ended up finding stab wounds in her front of her chest and in her back. They even found a ton of defensive wounds, meaning that Elisa had fought back for her life. They even had found a few like stab wounds and cuts on her body that lined up perfectly with a pair of scissors. So they assumed that some of those wounds were done by scissors. They even found a clip of Elisa's hair cut and laid beside her body. They had found that her pants were pulled down just to, reveal the lower region of her private areas. Her shirt was up, and the front of her bra was cut right between the cups of the bra. The saddest part on this autopsy is they concluded that based on the wounds that she sustained, it probably took her 30 minutes to die. Like, I cannot imagine like her family sitting there and being like, imagining that she had to lay there for 30 minutes, just bleeding out, dying. Now, they ended up taking all of her clothes and stuff from that day and even on her body, trying to test for DNA that was not hers. And the first person who had done a report ended up rushing the report and then did it within like just a few hours one night and said that they had found no DNA that matched anybody but Elisa. And the family was mad. Like, are you kidding me? This is an extensive report. Like, how do you do it in just a couple hours? And so they ended up taking all of her belongings and sent it to another lab tech guy. And he actually ended up investigating and testing every section of all of her belongings, especially her sweater. Now, this sweater had been like 17 years old and it had been disintegrating, but he took each section of the sweater. He had like gridded this sweater off and ended up in one section finding DNA that belonged to Danny Lowe Restivo. And because of like the strength of the DNA, they knew that it was not saliva or semen, that it had to be blood because of the strength of the DNA, meaning that Danny Lowe Restivo was present at the scene when Elisa Claps was murdered. And you remember that day, he had a cut on the back of his hand. So this was the smoking gun that the Elisa Claps family needed. But unfortunately, before the Italian police could arrest and extradite Danny Lowe Restivo back to Italy for his crimes, he had already been arrested by the police in Bournemouth to stand trial for the murder of Heather Barnett. The investigation into the Heather Barnett murder, when they had found out the similarities between the Elisa Claps murder and Heather Barnett, they knew that this was the smoking gun that they needed to, just confirm that it was Danny Lo Restivo and get him behind bars. So at first, Danny Lo Restivo ended up standing trial in England. In this case, the judge allowed the Elise Claps murder to be submitted into evidence to show the similarities between both cases. And they even also allowed the testimony of people in Italy to be submitted as evidence as well. And they ended up video chatting them into the trial and heard their testimony. These testimonies were from women and men who testified that Danny Lo Restivo had cut their hair or their girlfriend's hair on the bus or in the movies. One man even testified that his girlfriend's hair was cut in the movie theater. Danny Lo Restivo was sitting behind her and she kept getting her hair tugged, and she thought that like his feet were on the chair and just like pulling on her hair. And then the boyfriend ended up turning around to Danny Lo Restivo sitting there and ended up finding him pleasuring himself after cutting the woman's hair. So there was definitely a sexual motive to the hair fetish thing. And in both cases, Elisa Clap's hair was cut and Heather Barnett's hair was cut, and she had 2 sets of hair by her, like in both hands. And they tested them and they found out that one set of the hair, I think one of the sets of the hair was hers, and then one of them has still to this day never been identified. Like they have no idea whose set of hair that was. Now, if you remember, Danny Lo Restivo had issued a, bus ticket at 8:44. So how in the world could he have committed the murder of Heather Barnett if he was at the school taking this class? Well, as police were investigating this, they found out that he could have gotten on the bus at 8:44 to like give himself an alibi and then rode the bus just one stop and gotten off and walked back and still made it back to Heather Barnett's house in time to murder her. But when he went to the school, he was supposed to sign in a specific time that he got there. And when he signed in the exact time he got there and then realized that that time didn't match up because he had already committed the murders. And so he went back and scratched out the first number of the time and put a 9 so that it could be his alibi, even though they were able to completely confirm that his alibi was a bunch of bullshit. Now, I'm sure you are knowing exactly where this verdict is going, but the jury did find Danny Lo Restivo guilty for the murder of Heather Barnett in Bournemouth in England. So the jury found him guilty, but the judge got to decide his sentencing. And at the time, the judge was disgusted at this murder, mainly because Danny Lo Restivo murdered Heather Barnett knowing that the people that were going to find her body were her own children. And the callousness of that just disgusted the judge, and she gave him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Over time, they did appeal this because they did say that this was, too harsh of a sentence because the judge had taken into consideration the Elisa Claps murder, even though Danny Lo Restivo had not been convicted of that one yet. So his sentence did get reduced to 40 years in prison, but it is unlikely that he will ever be getting out. So he is at this point convicted of the Heather Barnett murder. What about Elisa Claps? I think later that year, just a handful of months, he was set to stand trial of the Elisa Claps murder in Italy. And because there was so much mounting evidence against him, he ended up deciding to just have the trial be, given without him present. So basically what this trial was like was there was no cross-examination. It was literally just a trial to present all of the evidence. There was no jury, and then the judge just decided like what his sentence would be for the crime. It was basically like him saying like, yeah, I know I'm guilty. Like, you can just have the trial without me and just like tell me what my punishment is. And he was found guilty, and the judge sentenced him to an additional 30 years in prison. Now, let's go back to the pastor, Don Mimmi, because there is so much suspicion on the like, okay, how did Elisa Clap's body get found? Like, what in the hell happened? So here are some speculations. It is alleged that Don Mimmi was a homosexual. So this gave people, especially Danny Lo Restivo's father, the ability to blackmail him and force his hand to help, cover up this murder. Now, we don't know if he was blackmailed or if he was paid off. Like we said in the beginning, Danny Lo's father, there had been some major withdrawals from his bank account that have still to this day not been accounted for. So it is assumed that he could have paid off Don Mimmi, Pastor Don Mimi to help cover this crime, which doesn't shock me because he was the pastor. The murder happened in the church, and so this would give the church a very bad reputation, and so he would do anything and everything to save face of the church, so he complied. Now, Don Mimi ended up dying in 2008, and it was just 2 years later that the body had been found. Now, people were really confused because in the early 2000s, this attic had been worked on. So how did they not know that there was a body? Like, this construction guy found it so easy. How did they miss this body? And so they interviewed some of the construction workers that had worked in the attic in the early 2000s. And these construction workers said that there was just a huge pile of rubble over in that area, like tiles and things like that. So he's like, there's no way, like, we didn't see anything. I think it was the pastor at the time or somebody like that had said that there was like tiles on top of the body. But when they did the examination and the autopsy of Elisa Claps, they said there was never any rubble on top of her. So there must have been rubble in front of her. But when the construction worker found her in 2010, there was no rubble. Where did it go? It didn't just fucking disappear. So what the fuck happened to it? And I didn't mention this, but when they did like examine the area and her body, they did find that there had been rubble around her. There was evidence to show that rubble had been around her body and not on it, but the rubble wasn't there. So here is the theory of what happened. The belief is that either Pastor Don Mimi was blackmailed or paid off to help hide the body and cover for Danny Lowe Restivo because he was connected with the family. We do have that picture of him at Danny Lowe's 18th birthday, and he helped cover it up for years. That's why he threw away the box. That's why he didn't ring his bells. That's why he didn't allow people to search his church, and he just stayed out of the investigation. It is believed that Don Mimi probably confessed before he died, that the weight of this knowledge of knowing that Elisa Claps was up there this entire time was just weighing too heavy on him, and that he ended up either confessing to somebody or confessing to the new priest at the church. And this new priest wanted to get the body discovered, but also save face for the church. So he was trying to figure out how to do it. The first way that they tried to get the body to be found was they ended up sending some cleaners up to the attic to clean it in early 2010. When the cleaners had went up, they did find the body, and this can be verified that it is true that these cleaners did find the body. And they went to the priest and told them, like, hey, there's a fucking dead body in your attic. Like, what the fuck? But they had known the case of Elisa Claps, and so they assumed it was Elisa Claps. And the pastor was like, you need to call this in. But they kind of, from what we're assuming, is they knew the game that the church and the priests were trying to play, and they were like, nope, we don't want any part of it. So they kept their mouth shut. So the first way they tried to get the body discovered didn't work. So they're like, okay, we got to try it again. So they end up causing the leak in the church, but then the construction workers come out and they fix the leak without having to go in the attic. So they cause the leak again and end up getting the construction workers back out there to go in the attic. And it is very well known that the priest was very involved with these construction workers with this leak, and that is not common. When there is construction or repairs that need to be done in the church, it's coordinated by people of lower, stature at the church. It's not handled by the priest himself. He's got other important jobs that need to be taken care of. But why was he so involved with this leak? And why was he so adamant? He was very adamant that these construction workers needed to go in the attic, and that's where they needed to do the repair. And that's where Elisa Claps' body was found. Suspicious. And also, one of the most damning pieces of evidence against Pastor Don Mimi is underneath Elisa's body, they found a purple button. Now, this button was found to be very similar to the buttons that were present on like the gown that the priests would wear. And so they ended up doing an investigation into Pastor Don Mimi's, whatever that is, the gown that they wear, because he had left it at the church for the new priest to inherit. They did an investigation into those buttons. They examined them scientifically and found that they did not match. But the scientist was like, all of the buttons have been changed. Like, she found evidence to show that all the buttons have been changed on this gown. So, who the fuck knows? there is so much more evidence to point to many other bigwigs within politicians and the government and things like that that were involved in this case that throw in so much more conspiracy that this was definitely like people were paid off and things were hidden for years. But I just can't get into all of them in this video because it would just be so freaking long. But I want to know in the comments below, did Pastor Don Mimi know? Did he help cover this up? Personally, yes. Yes, he did. 1000%, because that's the only way that this case makes sense to me, because he blocked them from searching the church. He didn't allow that little tip box in. He didn't ring his bells on the anniversary of her missing a few years later. Like the button, that was his button. I'm sorry. That's my opinion. That's my personal opinion. It's not fact, but that's my personal opinion. So comment below. What do you think? I would love to hear it. I am just thrown away. I will say that there was one pastor, oh my gosh, I cannot think of his name, but there was one pastor that was very, very, very prominent in this investigation. And he like talked with the family throughout the years, and he pushed to try to get justice for Elisa Claps. He even spoke at her memorial service, and it was a fiery message against like the church leaders and stuff that helped cover this up. And it was like just a grief filled message that wasn't just like this toxic positivity kind of thing, or like God has a way, or it was fiery. It was beautiful. People were crying. Like he had a heart for justice for this family, and he was an amazing priest. And to this day, he has made comments that he was and is ashamed to be associated with the church and the denomination that for so many years covered this up, and he wanted to give this family justice, and so he fought for them for years. So I will try to put his name on screen. I will find it before I post this, but he was an amazing, amazing, amazing man. And if he ever if he ever watches this, thank you for all the help you did for Elisa Claps and her family. You're the kind of pastor and priest that more and more churches need, because there's just too many bad apples, too many bad damn apples. But yeah, that's all I have for this case. I hope you found it interesting. If you guys have any case suggestions, please comment below. Also, I want to know your opinion. So below, tell me if you think Don Mimi definitely helped cover it up. Because we all know his dad did. But Pastor Don Mimi, did he? Did he not? What's your opinion? Let me know down below. And as always, have a good week. Take care of yourself. Do some self-care activities. Go take a bubble bath. Drink some water. You know, things like that. But I will see you guys next week. Have a great day. Bye.